Hey, this is Nicholas. Let's talk about how to study herbs, how to focus on what's important, how to make connections instead of just memorizing, and then some test-taking strategies you can use for answering questions on a test. Studying Chinese herbs can be really difficult. You may have started out thinking it was going to be magical, like Harry Potter, but then once you got into it, it ended up being something that was really hard and made you want to cry. It's actually really common for most students that herbs is their most difficult subject, mostly because when you're starting out, there just isn't any context. At least with acupuncture, you can practice locating the points on your friends, or you can see the points being used in clinic during a treatment. But with herbs, especially in your first year, you don't always see them in action. It's mostly just looking at words on the page, and those words don't always make a whole lot of sense. So something I hear from students is, they don't really feel like they understand herbs until they get to their formula classes. Because once you start seeing herbs in the formula, then it starts to have some context. You can see how the herbs work together, and you can see how they can be used to actually treat a patient in the clinic. So if you're just starting out with herbs and you feel frustrated and overwhelmed, like you're just staring at words on a page and none of it makes any sense, that's okay. That's normal. Just be patient for now, and as you get further along in the program, you'll start to see how it all fits together. But in the meantime, let's talk about some strategies you can use to get through the material, organize the information, and start making some sense out of all of this. So let's go ahead and get started. I make learning fun. Part 1. Categories. As you go through the material, and especially as you start accumulating a large number of herbs in your repertoire, by far the most important thing to know is herb categories. So for every herb that you learn, if you know nothing else about that herb, you should at least know the category. So just like in acupuncture, we have point categories that can give you some basic functions of a point. In herbs, we have herb categories that can clue you in on the basic characteristics of an herb. For example, if you know that an herb belongs to the category warm acrid herbs that release the exterior, you can probably guess that it's warm in temperature, it's acrid in flavor, and its main function is releasing the exterior. It probably enters the lung channel because the lung governs the exterior and the opening and closing of the pores. And acrid herbs tend to be dispersing, so you'll probably want to use caution in cases of deficiency. So just knowing the category can tell you a lot of information about an herb. So you want to train yourself to be able to look at an herb and then just automatically know its category. And unfortunately, there's really no easy way to do this. You kind of just have to drill it over and over and over. So one thing you can do is make flashcards. Get a pile, shuffle them up, and then flip through them. And that way you can practice looking at an herb and knowing which category it belongs to. Another option is, I have a tool on my website that lets you do the same thing. This page just gives you a random herb and then asks you to pick the category. This test is random and it goes on forever, so it's something you can spend a couple minutes on every day. Maybe pull it up on your phone when you have some free time, and then you can start making these connections between individual herbs and herb categories. But it's not enough to just match an herb to its category. You have to go a step further and think about what are the common characteristics of that category as a whole that will then apply to each individual herb in that category. So another example, herbs that invigorate blood tend to be warm and acrid because the acrid flavor has a moving and dispersing action. These herbs enter the liver channel because the liver stores blood and governs free coursing. And because of their moving action, these herbs are often contraindicated during pregnancy. So you want to go through each category and think about what are the general characteristics of this category in terms of taste, temperature, entering channels, cautions, and contraindications. And if you're having trouble coming up with this on your own, one place you can look for this information is at the beginning of each section in your textbook. Or if you're using the Chen book, it's in the summary at the end of each chapter. Another place you can look is at the lecture slides on the website. At the beginning of each section, I have a table that lists out the common characteristics of the category. So just to really drive this point in, when I say know the category, I actually mean two things. Number one, know which category each herb belongs to, and number two, know the common characteristics of that category that apply to the individual herbs. Because putting those two things together is what's going to help you answer questions on a test. So say you get a question like, which of the following herbs tonifies qi, raises yang, strengthens the exterior, and promotes urination to treat edema? When you get a question like this, usually the first function they list is the herb's category. So look at your choices and think about the category of each herb. Then make sure you pick the one from the category Tonify Qi. Or a question like, what is the taste and temperature of duzhong? Well, if you know that duzhong is in the category herbs that tonify yang, you can probably guess that it's sweet in flavor, because sweet herbs tonify, and you can probably guess that it's warm in temperature, because yang herbs are warm. So pick the answer that has warm and sweet in it. Or, what are the entering channels of cangju? Well, cangju is in the category aromatic herbs that transform dampness. Transforming dampness is a function of the spleen, so pick the answer that has the spleen in it. And then, going forward, knowing your categories is also going to be helpful when you get to your formula classes. When you're looking at a list of ingredients, just knowing the category of each herb can take you a long way in terms of understanding how this formula works and what it's trying to accomplish. So again, if you know nothing else about an herb, make sure that you at least know the category. Part 2. Functions. So knowing the category is a good first step, and it's an especially useful strategy for cumulative tests with a large number of herbs, because it gives you more of a big picture perspective. But when you're studying for weekly quizzes, you'll probably want to zoom in a little bit and be a little bit more detailed about each herb's individual functions. But that can get confusing real quick just because there's so much information, and after a while, everything starts to run together. So when you have all these herbs, how should you focus your attention in order to keep everything straight? It's like this. When you're going through a category of herbs, you want to focus on two things. Number one, within its category function, what is each herb's specialty? For example, when you're looking at the category warm acrid herbs that release the exterior, all of these herbs promote sweating to release the exterior, but what you want to pay attention to is, what is each herb's specialty? What makes it stand out? Is it especially useful for sweating or absence of sweating? Does it vent rashes? Is it good for dampness in the channels? Does it treat wind-cold headache? Does it open the nasal orifices? What's its specialty? Then, number two, besides its category function, what else does each herb do? So besides releasing the exterior, what else can each of these herbs do for us? Does it promote urination to treat edema? Does it warm the middle jiao? Does it treat B syndrome? Does it stop bleeding? What else is it good for? So if you have trouble summarizing herbs or figuring out what makes each herb unique, one place you can look is in your textbook. Whether you're using Bensky or Chen, at the end of each chapter, there's a summary of comparative functions that will compare the herbs and point out what makes each one stand out. I actually like to organize my notes this way. I put the herbs into a table with one column being what's its category specialty, and the second column being what else does it do. Then, when I study, I can cover up one side and go through each herb, practicing saying what makes it special and what makes it stand out. So again, when you want to simplify the information, first ask yourself what makes this herb special, and then besides its category function, what else does it do? Part 3. Properties. So when it comes to studying herbs, one of the big things that students have trouble with is remembering taste, temperature, and entering channels. A lot of students will look at this and think of it as an extra piece of information that they have to memorize. Don't do that. Instead, whenever you can, try to understand why an herb has a particular taste, temperature, and entering channel. First, connect those properties to an herb's category, and then second, to the herb's individual functions. So for example, let's take a look at the herb bohe, which is mint leaf. Bohe is in the category cool acrid herbs that release the exterior, so its taste and temperature are cool and acrid. Then, when we look at the functions, bohe releases the exterior, which is something we associate with the lung, because the lung governs the opening and closing of the pores. Bohe vents skin rashes, and the skin is again governed by the lung. And bohe treats sore throat, and the lung channel ascends to the throat. Then we see that bohe brightens the eyes, and the eyes are governed by the liver, and bohe gently moves liver qi, which of course is associated with the liver. So when you look at the functions this way, it should make sense that bohe enters the lung channel and the liver channel. So if you get a question on a test about what are the entering channels of bohe, this doesn't mean that you have to memorize an extra piece of information. This question is really just asking, do you know the major functions of bohe? So you want to start making these associations between herb function and entering channel. If an herb has anything to do with the blood, whether it's tonifying blood, invigorating blood, or stopping bleeding, it probably enters the liver channel. If an herb brightens the eyes, it probably enters the liver channel. If an herb transforms phlegm, it probably enters the lung and or spleen channels, since the spleen is a source of phlegm and the lung is the container of phlegm. If an herb treats constipation, it probably enters the large intestine channel. If an herb calms the shen, it probably enters the heart channel. If an herb benefits the breast tissue, it probably enters the stomach channel, since the stomach channel goes to that area. So instead of just memorizing, try to make these connections. Now I know that sometimes the taste and entering channels of an herb just don't make sense. And if you really wanted to, you could probably go digging through your books and maybe find an explanation. But really, I would say that if it doesn't immediately make sense, just don't worry about it too much. If that connection isn't clear, then you're probably not going to get a question about it on a test. And then, like I maybe mentioned before, I have audio lectures on my website for single herb categories. And in those lectures, I try to very clearly point out and explain how each herb's category and individual functions relate to taste, temperature, and entering channels. So feel free to check those out too. Part 4. Formulas. And finally, I want to briefly mention something about formulas. Like I said before, a lot of students will say that herbs start to make a lot more sense once they start studying formulas. So when you get to your formula classes, you can use this as an opportunity to study and review your single herbs. This is a situation where understanding the big picture can help you understand the individual pieces, and understanding the individual pieces can help you understand the whole. It's the same thing with acupuncture points. Understanding individual points can help you understand what's going on in a point prescription. And studying point prescriptions can reinforce what you already know about individual point functions. So when you look at your formulas, try to understand why the ingredients are there. Look at the category of each ingredient and look at the functions of each ingredient to see how it contributes to the overall treatment strategy of the formula. That way, when you get to your comp test or your board exams, you won't be thinking, oh no, I need to go back and restudy all those single herbs I haven't looked at in 2 years. Instead, you can start thinking of single herbs in terms of their position in an herbal formula. For example, I know that danjuye treats heart heat pouring into the small intestine because it's an ingredient in the formula daochursan, which is a formula for heart heat pouring into the small intestine. I know that rodoko warms the middle jiao and stops diarrhea because it shows up in the formula sishenwan, which is a formula that treats diarrhea due to yang deficiency. I know that yitang treats abdominal pain due to deficiency because that's why it's in the formula xiaojianzhongtong. So again, this is about trying to make connections and trying to understand why things are the way they are instead of just rotely memorizing them. So sometimes in my lectures and videos about single herbs, I'll mention certain formulas. Now this isn't to confuse you with extra information. This is just a way to give the herb some context and really highlight what makes each herb special. So those are my tips for studying Chinese herbs. Number 1, know your categories. Know the common characteristics of each category as a whole, and then know which category each herb belongs to. Number 2, focus on what makes each herb special or unique. Number 3, instead of memorizing, try to make connections between an herb's functions and its properties like taste, temperature, and entering channels. And number 4, use formulas as a way to deepen your understanding of individual herbs. So now let's turn it over to you. What are your favorite study tips? What difficulties have you encountered in studying Chinese herbs? And what advice have you found helpful? So go ahead and share it in the comments below. And remember, some of the best tips come from you. So I hope you found this video useful. This is actually part of a series about how to study Chinese medicine. The first video was about not panicking. The second video had general study tips that apply to really any subject. And this video was specifically about studying Chinese herbs. So if you haven't seen those other ones, go ahead and check them out. I'll put links in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed this video because that's all for today. Thanks and see you next time.